usually talked about. For a while, we have seen, we both work at Synchrony Financial, which is within the financial sector. And we continue to see how kind of cyber and fraud all kind of had a divergence, even though we're seeing an uptick in cyber fraud, right? Traditionally, we've seen that, you know, when a lot of people think cyber and even like fraud and cyber fraud, we see that cyber teams handle things like phishing, malware, compromised infrastructure, right? And then fraud handles the outcome of that, right? They handle the loss of money, the compromise of customer accounts. And we're seeing that it's much more than that. We're seeing that cyber fraud is, when we look at it, it's utilizing the same workflows as traditional cyber methods. So what we want to do in this talk is we want to talk a little bit about how, for an attacker, right, they don't think of the difference between cyber and fraud. They think about how they can get their money, how they can utilize the existing accounts, the existing workflows to get their financial transaction, whatever their financial strategy is. So what we want to talk about is how, as defenders, we kind of need to think about fraud the same way we need to think about cyber, because as we go into it, a lot of that kill chain actually intersects and kind of overlaps on top of each other. The difference is intent. So just introducing myself, Jonathan Gonzalez. I am a cyber threat intelligence analyst at Synchrony Financial. I've done everything from digital forensics incident response, vulnerability management, and web application security, and now I do cyber threat intelligence. So I get to do a lot of fun things at Synchrony Financial, get to write a lot of reports I hope people will read, and stay on top of emerging threats. And I'm going to pass it over to my awesome coworker, Gloria.
Hey everyone, I'm Gloria Haight, a senior incident responder at Synchrony Financial. I have over 10 years experience specialized in threat hunting, incident response, detection engineering, and security operations. It was a pleasure to be here and present my experience fighting fraud with you guys. Thank you.
And I know this is kind of unrelated, but Gloria was actually one of my mentors when I started at CrowdStrike in the Falcon Complete department. So she actually just joined Synchrony about, what, 6 months ago?
About 1 year now.
1 year, oh my God, so seeing her also join the team made it really awesome for me. So it's a joy working with her every day.
Absolutely.
So kind of talking about fraud and cyber fraud, right? We're going to talk about a little bit about the fraud kill chain. Now, how many of you guys are familiar with like the MITRE framework, right? The MITRE framework gives cyber defenders a lot of knowledge. Everything from reconnaissance to lateral movement to follow-on objectives. The fraud kill chain is very much the same. There's reconnaissance, there's resource development, psychological manipulation. They call it faux communication, right? Credential account access, authorized compromise, the fraud event, the monetization of the fraud event, and money laundering. And when we look at this, right, we may think, you know, traditional like check fraud and stuff. But with cyber fraud, it's a lot of the same things, just different access levels, different methodology. So like reconnaissance, right? Looking for compromised customers' accounts and PII, personally identifiable information, on the dark web, right? Utilizing bots to scrape compromised infrastructure that can return sensitive data from corporate infrastructure. API attacks or API reconnaissance that can return sensitive customer information, sensitive information about like session links, session tokens, anything that can give them a foothold to compromise customer accounts. Faux communication for cyber, right? There's that smishing, phishing, phishing. That's the same thing. They call it something else, but it's still the same thing, trying to psychologically manipulate someone to kind of enable fraud activities. And then credential compromise, there's keylog or session thefts, rats, and then monetization, wire fraud, crypto, gift cards. A lot of that goes to money laundering. But I think the thing that is also like the MITRE technique, the fraud kill chain doesn't necessarily kind of flow linear, right? Sometimes an actor will stop at a certain step, then loop back to reconnaissance, right? To enable them to go lateral movement. Sometimes, as they're trying to monetize, right? They're not going to deploy ransomware. They're not going to exfiltrate everything in an environment. They may try to sell lateral movement access to other scammers, other fraudsters, right? So I monitor the dark web, and I have to know this kill chain, because if I'm seeing on the dark web someone's posting 100,000 customer account infos, right? I'm not going to think, oh man, they're going to use that to deploy ransomware to exfiltrate, right? They're probably going to use that for things like if it's a retail account that it's connected with, right? Gift card reuse, gift card stacking, those point stacking. There's a lot of different tactics. So as a cyber defender who works with a lot of fraud teams, you kind of have to know this kill chain. And then also the reason for it and how it can intercept with cyber teams. And here's another one, just kind of showing the fraud kill chain, right? So as we see with like MITRE, right, reconnaissance, there's a bunch of different ways. For the fraud kill chain, there's things like SMS intercept, bots, malware, personal info, public domain, dark web. For things like monetization, that's where it kind of differs from the MITRE attack. You have things like cash out, subscriptions, ATM withdrawal, gift cards, that's a huge one. Crypto purchases, so they can launder their money through different crypto exchanges, mixers, tumblers, all that stuff. So when we talk about cyber controls based on that, one of the things I want to point out is the fact that these aren't just like the top solutions for stopping fraud. But when we think about what a fraudster does and how they want to compromise customer accounts, right, in the retail sector, the financial sector, these are a lot of the tactics that we were able to map with like the fraud kill chain, right? So that reconnaissance, right, API monitoring. They can find unauthorized routes. They can set high rates against the API to allow them access and show them information that they don't need. Device fingerprinting, right? So there was a big threat actor called Scattered Spider, who would try to socially engineer individuals, break into a lot of financial institutions, a lot of big banks. And one of the techniques that they did before they deployed ransomware, before they exfilled, was they tried to use the same device across multiple accounts, right? So a lot of banks said, hey, let's go ahead and fingerprint devices, right, upon login, so that if we're seeing them trying to register, more accounts on a specific device, that's going to flag activity, right? But when you're working in fraud, you can kind of have that same mindset, right? You can kind of say, hey, if there's someone trying to create, let's say you work in life insurance, right? And there's someone who creates an account, right? Adds an unknown beneficiary, right? Then on another account, creates that same beneficiary, jacks up their life insurance policy, stuff like that. And you'll see, and it's coming from the same device, but it created two different accounts. Well, that's a similar TTP just being used in the fraud domain, right? So kind of that same thing overlaps. Authentication holding. There's things like impossible travel, password resets. I talked about that, adding the beneficiary. Same things we all had to do if you worked in a cyber team in like identity or something like that, when the war in Ukraine, when the conflict with Israel, when the Iran war, all that stuff, you probably had to create impossible travel alerts, right? Well, if you guys are a financial institution or some other company and you don't do business in Kazakhstan, right, and you're getting a lot of account creation traffic in Kazakhstan, you may want to start looking at that, right? So same thing. There's endpoint detection, looking at keylog or rat behavior on financial endpoints. What data did they have related to customer accounts? Dark web monitoring. I have to monitor a lot of Telegram sites, dark websites related to credential dumps of customers. Mule ads saying like, hey, who can go into Lowe's and try these stack of credit cards with CVVs that we found on the dark web. We need to test them. They all have a different kind of fraud nexus that's different from cyber. But the point I want to drive home with all of these, kind of into the SIM fraud and loading especially, is that with cyber teams, you have this telemetry. And hopefully fraud teams also have this telemetry because it's a lot of the same tactics, right, that you can create rules against. But what we're seeing is that fraud teams often aren't utilizing the telemetries that cyber teams can use to create rules in their environment. And this could be a lack of awareness from cyber teams, a lack of awareness of fraud teams. But as we see, if you work in a company that has a customer nexus that experiences any type of fraud, you shouldn't just be thinking of how do each of these help me protect my company, but also how can these help protect my customers, right? I do want to point out another framework. It was actually released not too long ago on April 9th by MITRE's Center for Threat Informed Defense. If you guys aren't following MITRE Center for Threat Informed Defense, I strongly recommend you do. It's a great initiative to put in your programs. It's basically taking intelligence, relevant intelligence, and creating detection logic out of it. There's a mix of adversarial emulation in that, but it helps strengthen your organization. But anyway, MITRE created the F3 framework. It's called the Fight Fraud Framework. I want to say that's what the F3 is. Yeah, there it is. But it's basically another taxonomy for fraud. And it helps map fraud techniques to those detectable signals. So when we're thinking of like, hey, how do we protect our customers, right? It's another framework that you guys can use to see how cyber kill chains, right, differ from fraud kill chains. It's built for detection engineering. So as we saw, there was a lot of signals in the last slide that teams can utilize to help build detections to really defend their customers. And that's what the F3 framework is really built on. It helps bridge fraud and cyber teams. We're seeing a lot of companies start to pull their fraud teams into their cyber organization just because they want to be able to send these signals and say, hey, we created a rule in-house for something. How can we create it to protect our customers too, right? All of us, we work in a business, and, business, we never want to impact operations. We never want to make it so restrictive so that the customer doesn't want to use the phone app, right? But if there's additional signals that we can take advantage of to protect customers from fraud, let's take it, right? And that 3 framework is a great taxonomy that allows you to kind of see how it differs from cyber. And I think we put, yep. So for example, if you like the MITRE framework, it's a lot of the same thing. Reconnaissance, search open websites, domain, mail theft, PIN code peeking, interactive voice response mapping. There's some physical security attributes in there that isn't necessarily cyber, right? You probably don't have a lot of telemetry for mail theft, right? But if you do have something like, I don't know, customer mailing information or something in some index that you can pull into your SIM, right? You may be able to create suspicious like mail address change alerts, right? So just by that one TCP, kind of thinking outside the box, where do you have your kind of telemetry flowing in for your customers, if you have it? You can kind of create additional signals that you want to think about when you're protecting your enterprise, right? It's kind of 2 different worlds, but you want to see how you can find that commonality, but also, protect that other world, right? Before we go into case studies, which Gloria is going to talk about, as I said before, a lot of my job is monitoring the dark web. monitoring anything from Telegram chats, dark web channels, GitHub repos where they post paste bins. There is, if you're looking at like fraud signals, there's kind of varying degrees of relevance within the dark web. So for the first one is like credential markets. High confidence in those, except the fact that credentials can be recycled, right? A lot of threat actors, fraudsters like to kind of recycle compromised credentials. I recommend, if anybody's interested, it was, I want to say SleuthCon 2023, if you look it up on YouTube. CrowdStrike came out with a great report in which their data analysts did a report on how the monetization market, the monetization kind of economy of credential like advertisements on the dark web works, such as the financial sector, is able to make a cost of their credentials at 5% more than the technology sector, right? The odds of it being recycled are like 20%, something like that, right? So if you guys are interested, CrowdStrike does a great report on that at that conference. Mule recruitment. Medium confidence as far as cyber teams can create signals on that. A lot of that gets passed to fraud, but you do want to help out if you can create like fraud account patterns, additional logic to create like those new accounts, right? Those new device creations, right? Password resets. Because mules, as we see in the kill chains, have a lot of TTPs that you may be able to create signals on. There's also fraud kits, which are very like, if you know what a phishing kit is, right? Kind of does everything. You can have varying degrees of it, automation. Fraud kits do the same thing. And you may be able to take those apart, look at the TTPs, and see how you create signals. Lastly, monitoring for whenever they mention your organization, you're probably going to drive yourself crazy. You're probably going to laugh at it. I know if I looked up the amount of times Synchrony gets mentioned on the dark web, I would be here all day. Creating alerts that don't just mention your company on the dark web, but also mention some sort of context, such as like additional keywords, such as compromise from relevant threat actors. So if anybody tracks, like cyber threat actors within your organization, tracking fraud actors is another idea. So for example, we have a bunch of fraud actors that we like to track because they target the same financial markets as big banks like Bank of America, which we share like intelligence with. That's kind of like my overview of the taxonomies, kind of the conceptual level on how you can take all this information, run it back to your team, saying like, hey, what are we doing to help our customers? I am going to give it now to Gloria, who's going to talk a lot about the incident response side.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. So Jonathan just walked us through the intelligence side. Like every signals you could catch before an attack happens. And now I'm going to, hey, it works. Awesome. Now I'm going to go over the detection and response side with you with some case studies. So first case study, a construction company gets hammered, over $500,000 lost within a week, and then long recovery with multiple legal actions. And as an incident responder, here's what haunts me most. Zero cybersecurity plays in place at the time of the attack. Not an outdated or old plan, just zero plan. And you can see the detection chain here, or the attack chain here rather, is really straightforward. It starts with a phishing email, impersonate as a supplier, and then keylogger get installed, credentials get stolen, and then money transfer started, and funds hit mule accounts before the bank even blinks. And you can see there's no sophisticated tactics and techniques here, just a keylogger and an absence of anyone watching. So Give me 1 second. Here we go. So how could detection and response change this whole thing? So first of all, phishing delivery. Let's say we have an email coming in, looks like a supplier invoice. However, it has a link that point to GitHub or some other repo, and then that link will pull down a file with double extension, something like invoice.pdf.zip. And if we have email sandbox, we can perform additional analysis, and also custom CM alerting can alert on double extensions, and then you catch it. As a response, you quarantine emails, block the sender and URL, and then submit the repo for takedown. And that's done. Full stop. The whole attack chain break here. And let's see it slips through. The malware execution happened, but you have EDR so that your EDR is watching for the execution, and then there are custom execution policies in place. Keylogger tries to run, the EDR screams, blocks it, quarantine the malware artifacts, and now you got to work on malware remediation and perform root cause analysis. What if the keylogger runs successfully and credential harvest happened? Well, if you have UEBA control, they will flag those anomalies on your endpoints, and then you have keylogger signatures that would fire. And if that happened, we will block the processes and quarantine the artifacts, and also reset credentials. And now the attacker has a password that's already expired. And let's say if unauthorized login eventually happened, while you're saying a login from a new device, geo-impossible location, and then happen after hours, those are all good signals for you to have an alert and then take action. So as a response, we revoke active sessions, lock accounts, and impact analysis begins. And let's say all of these controls are not in place and fraudulent transfer happened. Well, we have detections in place for first-time beneficiary rule. Whenever there is a first-time transfer from a new account, we're putting a little bit more effort to verify and double check that. And then we have high value transaction and new device monitoring. Those two combined together, not a good sign. And then we have after hour transaction monitoring. Once we see those anomalies, we will notify it to the fraud team so that they could pause the transaction, and the whole wire stops here.
Go next.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. So here's case study 2. Well, before going to case study 2, I do want to mention that you can see the 5 controls for case study 1, like all of them, any one of them works. You don't need to have a perfect plan. You just have to not have the zero plan. So moving on to case study 2, funds transfer fraud. And this one is near and dear to my heart because unlike case study 1, it doesn't involve any malwares. It's more like an exploitation of the process. It's exploiting human, the call and the trust. And so here is how funds transfer fraud works at a high level. First, the attacker, now it works. Sorry. Let me move again back.
Want me to go back?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So first, the attacker, they are doing their homework. data acquisition via API, phishing, dark web purchase, or account takeover to steal personal data or public data, anything they can do to build a profile on you. And second, they will become someone you trust, a lawyer, your executive, your business partner, someone has a legitimate reason to contact you and ask for money transfer. And then they make the ask. They will send fraudulent transaction, or they just call in to change a transaction. And because it looks like it comes from someone legitimate, people approve it. And you can see the attack surface here. It doesn't involve anything sophisticated. It's far simpler. First, we have unauthenticated APIs. That means API endpoints may exposing data that shouldn't be public. For example, unique partner ID, country code, stuff that seems to be boring until you realize an attacker can use them to do something more powerful. And then we have public OSINT. Your company's org chart, your executives' names, your company policies, all of them are discoverable via Google search, and the attackers can use those information to build a convincing impersonation. And then third, weak call center auth. Those knowledge-based authentication questions. For example, what is your regional manager's name? Well, congratulations, Google has all the answers for you. So your public call center questions sometimes may just be a public trivia game. And lastly, we have spoof email escalation. Let's say all of the call center is doing a good job and blocked the transaction, blocked the change. Someone may still be able to craft a really good spoof email and send to the company impersonating as an authorized partner to bypass all the controls and ask for approve the transaction. Yes, please. Thank you. So how do we fight it? We have, first of all, exposed APIs and webs. We have detections in place for, so here's what I love as an incident responder, actually, is that we can enumerate our own API data, our public web information before the attacker does. And we can ask ourselves if this information can be used by an attacker to take advantage, or if this information is really necessary to be exposed to the internet. And a lot of times the answer is no. And in addition to that, we can perform API frequency analysis in our logs, and we will find anomaly activities. Attackers are noisy if you're looking for them. And with all of these information we discovered, what we can do, we can work with the application team to put authentication gates in front of exposed API endpoints. And then we can also remove sensitive fields from public APIs. And then moving on to weak call center authentication. And this one is also a cross-team effort. So we need to inventory all data elements for those call center authentications, for higher risk transaction requests, and think like a criminal, and asking yourself, can I get this information? Can I get this data from public social media? Can I get this data? Can I buy this data from a data broker? Or can I query for this data from a public API? And then The solution to it is a step-up authentication for transaction changes, out-of-band verification, and then call back to an authorized, call back to a verified number, not the number the caller just provided to you, and then define a minimum authentication bar by different transaction risk tier, and also of course, replace knowledge-based authentication questions to something that really matters. And moving on to behavioral anomalies. So we have different rule patterns we can build to catch anomalies. For example, repeated authentication from the same device, and high-frequency transaction changes within a short window. And we can correlate all of these signals with other risk signals and define an escalation path and route those anomaly alerts for our fraud team to triage further and to perform near real-time response. And lastly, it's very interesting is fraud ring correlation. So we're not only focusing on one single suspicious transaction, but we're looking at different clusters of, for example, shared beneficiaries, shared overlapping call center metadata, device fingerprints, and geographical patterns to really connecting the same pattern across different transactions from different accounts together. And then after gathering those patterns, we can build an operational dashboard for real-time visibility and share it with our fraud team so that they can catch those fraud ring operations and see how it moves. And moving on to the last and third case study, and this one is a short one. It's payroll pirates. It's showing that fraud isn't only limited to financial institutions. It can happen to everyone. So how payroll pirate works is that the attacker will try to phish HR for financial credentials, and then using those credentials to log into your payroll portal. It could be ADP, Workday, or whatever you use. And then they change their account and redirect the direct deposit to a meal account. And then they walk away. The victim wouldn't notice until payday, and the money has already gone. Happy Friday. And what are the detection signals here? It's quite similar to the last one. Those fraud signals, a lot of times they're overlapping with each other. So for this one, we can combine a direct deposit change with a new device and generate an alert. And also watch out for new IPs paired with account change activity, and also clustering the banking info changes and watch out for like sudden velocity of that change across different accounts. And then once we saw those signals and generated those alerts, we can analyze logs for shared banking accounts across users to assess the impact if such payroll pirates activity actually happen. And then we can escalate to our fraud team to freeze the affected payroll routing changes, and then further review and work on recovery. And move on, please. Thank you. And so all of the things we have covered so far, the frameworks, the TTPs, the detection and response, it's all building to this slide. It's like it only works when cyber and fraud are actually talking with each other. So let's go ask your fraud team, what signals do they track? What are their blind spots? And where do they need earlier visibilities? And you may find out that the fraud team is waiting for you to ask those questions all along, and then start sharing. You can share your dark web intel and credential exposure alerts. Those intelligence you get, they're gold to a fraud analyst, and in return, the fraud team can share fraud case patterns and new signals with you, which you can use to build high quality Splunk alerts or CM alerts, and then act one shared channel, either Slack or Team or whatever messaging system you use, one joint playbook, and then define an escalation path. That's how we work together as a fraud fusion team. And I think that's it for this slide. Awesome. So I'd be doing you a disservice if I get to the end of the talk without going over AI. So here we go. AI is changing the fraud threat landscape very fast. And we have different ways attackers are taking advantage of AI. For example, AI phishing. We have scam scripts generated at scale. And honestly, a lot of times it's more convincing than what humans write. And then we have deep fake. We have real-time voice and video cloning impersonate executive members and partners. That phone call you got from your CFO saying, hey, good to go with this wire transfer may not be your CFO. And then we have identity spoofing, fake IDs, pay stubs, utility bills, all of them generated by AI at scale and get through manual onboarding. And we have polymorphic malware. AI-enhanced malware rewrites itself per target, which evades signature, like traditional signature-based detections before defenders can update rules. So I know that's a lot, but here's the thing. Defenders, us, we get to use it too. So next slide, please. We have AI anomaly detection that can catch what traditional rules miss. For example, transaction velocity spikes, device trust shifts, session anomalies. AI is good at combing through noises and identify anomalies. And then we have LLM-assisted email analysis. It's like fighting fire with fire. So for those AI-generated scam scripts, they may pass through keyword filters, but with LLM-assisted email analysis, they're actually focused on the intention and the manipulation instead of keywords. So there's a better chance those will be flagged by LLM-assisted email analysis. And then third and last, AI-accelerated threat intel. So we have AI agents monitoring dark web forums and telegrams all around the clock, and they will flag voice, deep fake tool sales, and synthetic ID kits, those fake IDs, and phishing script at machine speed. And then they will flag that to you, surface that to you for near real-time triage. So that's the beauty of it. And at the bottom, we have a real-world win. So that's relatively fresh. It comes from last month, from the initial update by Anthropic last win. It's that AI detected and prevented a fraudulent 1.5 million wire transfer, catching email compromise and spoof phone call attack before funds left the account. To be fair, the report is lack of details, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's still a good outcome. Moving on, please. And here is our last slide, key takeaways. So first, fraud is a cyber problem. It's the same TTPs, so cyber teams have the tools and methodology to disrupt it. And as we can see from those case studies, most fraud still exploits basic but effective gaps, like those weak call center authentications. Those are easy to fix. So the gap isn't sophistication, it's communication. And we can say how powerful cyber intel is to provide pre-attack warning and device fingerprinting and your SIEM platform is a force multiplier. You don't need a dedicated fraud detection tool if you have Splunk and some device fingerprinting tool like iOvation that can make you create so many high quality rules and enable rapid attribution. And then lastly, AI is accelerating every stage of the chain and will have to get ahead of the game. So start with a conversation with your fraud team sooner than later. And that's it for today's session from my end. Thank you so much for listening. And Jonathan and I were here for any questions.
Something you said interesting regarding phishing, right, with AI generated content. How often are you seeing that in regard to this in quite a bit? And then also you talked about identifying voice scripts using AI. Like how you do that? Because that's really cool. That's imagine being helpful. How do you take that to like the monitoring team to say, be on the lookout for that?
Yeah, two parts. One is phishing. We actually see that one like 3 months ago or so. It's from we didn't know it's a pen test, but it turned out to be a pen test. It's funny that, our one of the executives who's in charge of AI, they made a deep fake of him and put it on an external SharePoint page, and then put it as a link in an email and send it to our employees to let us all try a new product. And then the video was actually pretty real, but also find a little bit weird. So we reached out to the executive to ask what's going on. And the executive was like, oh, okay, that's not me. And that's it. And then it made us feel like, oh, okay, there might be something going on. So, and then actually checking logs, we find out the executive is the first person who hit that URL a couple of days before everyone else received it. That's how the whole mystery was demystified. And then, sorry, to answer your second question about phishing, about those voice scripts, it's like for different companies, they have different like call center authentication procedure, right? So if you feed that procedure, first doing recon on that procedure and then feed it to AI, and then it will generate a pretty convincing like narrative, either impersonating as a customer or as a business partner to bypass AI, and to bypass the call center, and that's what we see.
Their script to bypass it.
Yeah, so let's say I've seen it where they find an open directory of like a call center, like let's say Aetna, right, on Rogers Road has a open directory with like a call center script, right? They're able to find that, feed it into some LLM, right, create a pretty convincing customer script in which they're able to, reset their two-factor authentication. I know Scattered Spider, they kind of enhanced their tradecraft because they were able to pause a lot and do like and they use at times like synthetic. We're seeing automated kind of voice synthetic packages being sold as well as scripts. So we're seeing also in the cyber fraud realm, in the social engineering realm, we're seeing actual rings in which they recruit people on the dark web to be like a caller. They need people to write the scripts, refine the scripts. They need people who can speak fluent English, bunch of different requirements. And AI is assisting all of that, right? So for example, if they take the feedback back and they say, hey, we were on too long and it raised alarm bells, they use it to, bring it back. As far as synthetic identities, it's passing KYC. It's a huge problem. For example, Mythic and Fable, right, got taken down by US government yesterday because of foreign actors and stuff. I can see a KYC requirement being very near future. And so the rush to bypass that as a KYC, we're going to start seeing cyber actors try to bypass KYC to utilize AI itself. That's what I see in the future. So, yeah. You can corner us also.
Unfortunately, we have to thank them for their time and see them out. I'm sure they'll be happy to take some questions out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate y'all very much.
Thank you so much.